It wasn't too long ago that we talked about some of the free updates or upgrades that the Switch 2 would be getting on launch day. That being for current Switch games or Switch 1 titles. A lot of discussion's been around the paid updates, which includes things like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Party, to name a few. Well, now we have some of the details around the free updates, and yes, that does include Scarlet and Violet. Can Game Freak finally get their latest big open world Pokemon game running at a, we'll say, acceptable frame rate and looks decent enough? Well, that's what we're going to look at here today. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So this is over on Nintendo's page, which I will link this down below if you wanted to look through it a bit more, or even just come back to it later on as we get like close enough to that June 5th release that you want to see maybe which ones you want to fire up when you get your new system. Although I know most of the time you get a new system, you're thinking, oh, brand new games to play. But considering we never did get that Switch Pro, there is like legitimate reason in some cases to go back to these games, or maybe even buy them for the first time, since I'm sure there are some of the performance stuff just got in the way to the point you didn't even want to necessarily go through it at that time. I mean, seriously, there's Pokemon Scarlet and Violet comes up a lot. That is a game that I legitimately stopped playing because it was just getting noticeable and annoying. There's another game that I'll point to as well as we go through here because it's on the list, and I'm actually pretty excited for some of this stuff. So let's start at the top here. They go over the free updates that enhance the gameplay experience on Switch 2 system will be released for select Nintendo Switch games. Keep in mind, these will be updates you have to download, but these are specifically updates that are available at launch, as in most likely, I say most likely, there will be more updates in the future for other games, and there's a couple I'll throw out there as we go through here. Okay, so at the top, starting with ARMS. So they actually have the update available. These should all be June 5th, but the updates include visuals, so optimized for Nintendo Switch 2 display and high-end resolution TVs for improved image quality. Frame rate optimized for Nintendo Switch 2 for smoother movement, even when playing with 3 or more players, which, to my understanding, when you got to a point where you're splitting up the screen a lot, you did just drop frame rate in general, so it could sort of accommodate the extra screens and players there. And then HDR support. HDR support is actually quite interesting, and you're going to see that pop up here a few times. Not necessarily just for the dock mode. Keep in mind, there is a legitimate reason for just about all these Switch 2 titles that you see in the future to support HDR completely, because the screen that you have with the Switch 2 in handheld mode supports HDR. So it's something there that, well, everyone who develops for the system knows that it is available to that player. It's not like, oh, there is a Switch Pro and that has HDR, but the base one doesn't. It's like, how much do we have to take advantage of it? No, this is there from the start. So that is a nice benefit, I guess, from the new generation. What do you start with? What does everyone have? HDR, which, again, you're going to see here quite a bit, makes a lot of sense to target that, especially if there are people out there who have never experienced, like, good HDR. I mean, some of these games with the art styles are really going to pop off the screen for these. Big Brain Academy, Brain versus Brain. So that just has game share support. Up to 4 players can play in party mode, share locally or share online via game chat. We have Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. Visuals, so optimized, of course, for Switch 2 displays, high-end resolution TVs. HDR support, again, works in really well to that art style. Game share support, 2 people can play all of the courses, and then you can share locally or share online via game chat. Clubhouse Games, we already know that was mostly going to be about game share support, and they do go over it here a bit more. Up to 4 people can play 34 games, and you can share online via game chat or just locally there. Game Builder Garage, so the optimized visuals for display high-end TVs, and supports the Joy-Con 2 mouse controls, which does make a lot of sense for this. When you're building games, you're technically dragging and dropping stuff and moving, connecting points that way. So it makes a ton of sense to be able to kind of simulate the touch controls that you would have there with the touch screen on the big screen there when it's docked. And when it is up, say, on a 4K display, being able to smooth out the text and all the fine print that's going to be on the screen as you build out some of these more complex setups. That's just going to help the game in general in terms of its presentation. So that's a better upgrade than I think people are realizing here. Now we do have Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. You know, I will say, when I looked at this, originally when this was in there, I said, that game already looks fine. They just say visuals optimized for a Switch 2 display and high-end resolution TVs for improved image quality. No HDR, unfortunately. A lot of these Nintendo first-party games, especially with like Mario and stuff, seems like how colorful they are would look really, really cool with HDR being enabled. But I guess in this case, the resolution or just the overall image of it will look better. I mean, it is a game from the Wii U era. Let's go to the Switch. Now to the Switch 2. Okay, this is clearly the one that people are really curious about, myself included. Okay, so Scarlet and Violet. As expected, they have the same the same upgrades, updates, and everything here across both. So that is visuals optimized for Switch 2 display and high-end resolution TVs and frame rate. So they're specifically pointing that out here. Improved for smoother movement on Switch 2. Okay, so Scarlet and Violet. Docked, I think, was the most egregious part about this. Not that handheld wasn't that much better, but it's covered up in a smaller screen. When you're playing on, say, a larger flat screen that's 40 some odd inches, 55, 65, whatever, it becomes so obvious that it just does not look good. I mean, image quality, things are breaking up, like you can see around the edges of them. Texture quality is ballooned up, and it just doesn't look great. And when it was in docked mode, it would go between 720p and 1080p. Usually it would sit somewhere in the middle. I think Digital Foundry and Eurogamer quoted like 864p was the average in terms of resolution that it would sit at. And the frame rate was, it was egregious as well. It was like in the 20s most times when you're running around in the open world. So this could end up being a big deal for these two games. It is the situation that I mentioned, though. It would technically be the $450 patch. Now, I don't know if Game Freak really was just... they were in over the head with Scarlet and Violet on the Switch hardware, but we've seen what studios like Monolith Soft can pull off. I mean, some of these other titles that we're going over, it's like, yeah, okay, they were fine. They weren't in the 20s in terms of frame rate. We're just getting to the point now with Scarlet and Violet where we think 1080p... I mean, realistically, I'm thinking, okay, maybe it'll be at 30, but to be honest, it should just be at 60. Like, it should be 60 frames, 1080p. Maybe they do decide to do some upscaling in there and push it up to like 4K upscaled. I mean, I have basic hopes, I feel like, for this game, but Game Freak continues to shock me at times, not in a good way with some of the stuff they turn in. But still, let's say they pull this off and Scarlet and Violet run as they should. For many people out there, I'm sure, even though they sold really well, it seemed like there were people who either picked it up and started playing it and they were like, ooh, this is tough to get through, or they just avoided it completely. So Scarlet and Violet, if this is good, might be worth picking up then on the Switch too. And of course, that'll be these will be one of the first games that I really test outside of course, some of the Switch 2 titles. Going back though to the Switch 1, I have my eye on two titles really. So I played through Violet, I'll pop in Violet. And these two here, Echoes of Wisdom and Link's Awakening. Now, Echoes of Wisdom is another one where it really did struggle in terms of frame rate, specifically in the open world, and specifically when you got more and more echoes and you were throwing them around and there was a lot of stuff happening on screen, the frame rate would struggle. It was very uneven and would kind of jump all over the place. In this case, visuals optimized for Switch 2 display and high-end resolution TVs for improved image quality and HDR support. Now, I see some people already going, oh, they're not doing anything about the frame rate. Well, here's the thing. The target frame rate was 60. Okay, for either of these games here, and it would just fluctuate all over the place. In this case, though, I think what you're going to see with the Switch 2 is it will be able to push this up, I would assume, just to 60 frames per second. I mean, we're looking at a jump from the Switch to the Switch 2 that is quite significant. So that's sort of what I'm thinking here. Visuals are optimized for Switch 2 display, high resolution TVs. You push it up to 4K upscale, and you just have a frame rate that is not sputtering all over the place in the open world, and you have HDR support. Now, similar for Link's Awakening, same thing, except in this case, I remember it being inside of dungeons or anything like that. The frame rate was fine. It was when you were outside that it was all over the place, and it had some weird frame time issues. I would assume that would also be ironed out just from the more powerful system and the frame rate not being locked to like 30 or something like that. Okay, so HDR support there for either of these should make the games look really, really good, whether it's on the big screen with a nice HDR setup or in handheld mode. Again, we'd be able to take advantage of the display there with HDR and high refresh rate. I don't think I say now, but who knows when we get in our hands. I don't think any of these games are going to test the 120 FPS mode in handheld mode, but it's something to at least keep an eye on there. At the very least, I'm hoping that any of these games that are locked at 30 do get it at least unlocked to 60, or if they've been all over the place in that like 30 to 60 range, they're just pushed up and they hug 60 FPS. So I will be immediately checking out Echoes of Wisdom and Link's Awakening when it releases. Now, these other two, I will admit, less, okay, I shouldn't say that, because the HDR support is another thing that will be kind of interesting here, but either of these games ran pretty good or okay. Like, it wasn't egregious or anything. Like, something wrong, I'm playing it going, man, I wish we just had a Switch Pro to play these games. Not like how I was with Pokemon Scarlet or Violet. Still, though, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. Bowser's Fury, in general, it just has a bunch of updates for it, which, okay. Visuals, of course, for the resolution, the high resolution TVs, frame rate optimized for smoother movement on the Switch 2, including Bowser's Fury, which in handheld mode for Bowser's Fury on the current Switch, it was cut down to 30 FPS. So in that case, okay, I assume it's going up to 60 FPS here on the Switch 2, and then just in general for the docked mode, it will just be a much smoother, cleaner experience in terms of the frame rate. And then HDR support, but that is for Bowser's Fury only. Almost feels like some of these Wii U titles that are coming up, I guess they didn't have HDR support. It's just kind of interesting that you'd go into the game and you would have HDR support for one part of the compilation, but not the other, while in that same game. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting there. Game share support, though, up to 4 people can play Super Mario 3D World. In Bowser's Fury, 2 people can play it together, with one player controlling Mario and the other controlling Bowser Jr. You can share locally or share online via game chat. So it's actually pretty cool. And then Super Mario Odyssey. We have visuals, so optimized for Switch 2 display and high-resolution TVs, HDR support, and then they have game share. 2 people can play together, with one player controlling Mario, the other controlling Cappy, and then share locally or share online via game chat. So Mario Odyssey, I do believe, could look extremely impressive through the Switch 2 on a nice TV, or even in handheld mode. I think in general, with the resolution going up, sure, but also just HDR support, that is, out of the entire list here of titles, I think Mario Odyssey is the game that could look the most impressive on a high-end display with HDR support. And then on top of that, it was a pretty good overall experience, I feel like, when it comes to the frame rate, the smoothness of the game, the responsiveness. That's one that, while it may not be immediately noticeable because it's like, oh, it was 60 before, now it's 60 again, I would be curious if they decided at some point to push the frame rate up, but it's not listed here, so I assume that's not happening. But either way, say in handheld mode, it should look really good there, and it's a game that already is great to play. It feels good to play. I think this is one that's going to look really, really impressive in general with the added HDR and visuals. So overall, you know what? It's not a bad start, and I say start because these free updates, I would like to assume that more will be coming down the line. As I mentioned, a few titles off the top of my head, basically any of the stuff from Monolith Soft, those are games that really stuck out to me on the current Switch, where the resolution had dropped so low in handheld mode, the characters lost their faces in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. But still, I think something like Xenoblade Chronicles X, if you just lifted the frame rate cap on that, where it's set at 30, goes up to 60, you could say optimize it for, they say high resolution TVs or Switch 2 display, sure. But the game already looks pretty good. And I think it would just be a very impressive thing to see a world of that size, but at, say, upscaled 4K and 60 FPS. It'd be really, really cool. The other one is Bayonetta 3. And that definitely has its performance issues across the board. But something like Bayonetta 3, or even Astral Chain, if they decided to lift the frame rate cap from 30 to 60, for those sorts of games, like high-speed action titles, I think frame rate is key, and would be a much more enjoyable experience playing at those sorts of frame rates on a more powerful system like this. The only situation there is Platinum. It's been kind of going through it. People are trying to figure out if they still even exist as they did when they worked on something like Bayonetta 3, let alone Astral Chain. So I unfortunately don't know if that's going to happen, but it would be nice if they could. Otherwise, though, this is something that could be a lot of fun to keep an eye on as we go through the Switch 2 generation. Maybe a just random free update shows up online for an older title that you have or have thought about picking up, and it's like, whoa, okay, cool. So now it looks better, it runs better, or it has new features like mouse mode or even game sharing with some friends. Yeah, maybe I'll check it out. So I don't know, just something interesting to keep an eye on here with Nintendo for these free updates. And again, I'll have this link down below if you wanted to go through it for yourself to check in on some of these games again as we get closer to June 5th for the launch. But let me know what you guys think about this, and if there are any other games you would like to see tested. Again, I'm mostly looking at the Pokemon titles and the Legend of Zelda titles that had some frame rate issues. But Mario Odyssey, I got to tell you guys, looking at that through HDR and even cleaner with the resolution boost and others, that might be another one to check out there. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.